When you are told and shown repeatedly that you can always do more, you begin to lose sight of your limitations.
If a predictable response can be evoked, it can be exploited. So how do we push up against that? Good day and welcome to the Consultant and the Coach podcast. How are you today, Josh?
Doing great. Catching up to you here. Glad to be here.
This is so life application. So the last 2 weeks, we've been going over All the War They Want by Jeff Engle, which is a book. I mean, he runs a company that does cyber technology, compliance, defends against cyber risk. But we're on to, in the book, All the War They Want, life application. And as I was telling you before the podcast started, these are my favorite podcasts. Mm-hmm. I love, because really, if you cannot apply it to life, why read the book? Mm-hmm. And we can. We can apply this book to not only life, but as the last podcast we did last week on business. Yep. So devotion for the book, what'd you come in terms of life application?
So I got one's a little inappropriate. But I think
I noticed that when I read the notes ahead of time. So you just go with the inappropriate devotion.
All right.
I'll give you
the
my
devotion is
comment.
not inappropriate, but it connects to a funny statement that we don't usually swear on the air. But I'm going to because of the quote.
Okay.
Just preparing people who care. All right. It's attributed to the beginning of chapter 6, attributed to Colonel Charles Beckwith. He says, "I'd rather go up the river." I'm trying to think of his tone when he's saying this. Like I'd think of him, he's like shouting this, right? "I'd rather go up the river with 7 studs than 100 shitheads," right? And what that made me think of was the fact that there's the Book of Judges and Gideon, who, by the way, my son's name, so I sort of know that name, know that story. It's not a new concept. God does the same thing. God says it's all about who you do it with, right? I think in a similar way. So here's the story. Judges chapter 7. Jerubbaal, that is Gideon. That's what I should have named my son, Jerubbaal. That'd have been tough. And
for Gideon's sake, I'm thankful you named your son Gideon.
"And everyone who was with him got up early and camped beside the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them, below the hill of Morah in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, 'You have too many people for me to hand the Midianites over to you, or else Israel might brag. I did it myself. Now announce in the presence of the people, whoever is fearful and trembling may turn back and leave Mount Gilead.' So 22,000 of the people turned back, but 10,000 remained." So it's getting back to the how many go up the river with you part, right? "Then the Lord said to Gideon, 'There are still too many people. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you. If I say to you, this one can go with you, he can go. But if I say about anyone, this one cannot go with you, he cannot go.' So he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, 'Separate everyone who laps water with his tongue like a dog. Do the same with everyone who kneels to drink.' The number of those who lapped with their hands to their mouths was 300, and all the rest of the people knelt to drink water. The Lord said to Gideon, 'I will deliver you with 300 men who lapped and hand the Midianites over to you, but everyone else is to go home.' So Gideon sent all the Israelites to their tents, but kept 300, who took the people's provisions and their trumpets. The camp of Midian was below him in the valley." And as the story goes, they didn't even actually have to attack. They just had lanterns under cover, and they surrounded and made a ton of noise and broke all the lamps, which basically tricked the enemy, right? And they're thinking that they had 10,000, which I think originally they had 32,000 people, down to only 300, right? Same thing. The story here is go with the 7 studs instead of the 100, right?
And even idea. Into previous podcasts.
So who you do it with matters.
He was breaking some rules.
Right.
That's not how you do war.
Right.
They broke some rules.
Right. That's how you have to do it. And I think it applies to life, right? It applies to life of faith, right? We have to think differently. We serve a God who's not constrained by economy or not as constrained by resources the way we think about them, right? So being willing to have faith and break rules in places we feel properly led. Anyhow, so I thought that
this is where, primarily our reach is to Christians, is who this podcast is geared towards. And, something like Christians got to do everything exactly by the rules. Well, what happened with Gideon? What happened with Jacob, who wrestled with God? I mean, you see in Scripture, lots of people, they broke a lot of symbolic rules, and God's saying, hey, I want you to think out of the box, and I want you to wrestle. Now, he also says, therefore, go and sin no more. So there's this conflict that you see, and we're out doing business, not with Christian companies, I mean,
Right.
I am a Christian leading a company. You
Right.
are a Christian consulting.
Right.
But there's a lot of ways. How do we act as Christians and break rules that are okay to be broken? What does that look like?
Right. Yeah. No, and there's a lot of this, and I think wrestling is a good analogy, right? There is a wrestling that must take place from a faith perspective, from a parenting perspective, from a how do you live and act and do business in the world perspective. We're not going to get it right all the time. No one in Scripture did, certainly. I mean, they got it wrong most of the time, seems like.
Frequently.
At least frequently.
So life application for Jeff Engle's book, All the War They Want. What stuck out to you first? You have pages and pages of notes of life applications. What stuck out to you first?
Not as many as you think, but no, I do have a couple good ones. So one I think is I think it's from chapter 11. I think if I got the right one, maybe not. Page 126. It was really interesting. He talked a lot about his training, and he talked about when you are told and shown repeatedly that you can always do more, you begin to lose sight of your limitations. And I thought that was really interesting because I sort of hope that I could parent in that way. I probably don't. I probably give my kids way too many limitations because otherwise, my goodness, chaos would reign. But it made me wonder about when I'm working and raising and encouraging and instructing my children, how do I tell and repeatedly show them they can always do more? Not in the sense of like earning my love more, right? I'm really careful about that. I'm really careful about how I message things about, like, using running as an example, right? Because, we probably use it too often. But, as you know, my son ran like crazy fast 42-second PR, right? In this last...
And one of the top runners in the nation.
Yeah. And one thing I told him before this race that I tell him before lots of other races is two things. Like, hey, buddy, it doesn't matter how fast you run today. Am I going to change how much I love you? Nope. And, of course, sometimes he said to me, well, what if I walk the race? And I'll say, I'll still love you, but I'll still kick you in the pants until you start running. But then the other thing I tell him is like, and you better believe, I believe, you're the toughest kid I know. And so when it gets hard and it gets tiring and it starts to hurt, I believe that you are tougher than every other kid on that course, and I will always believe that. And so I try to find both sides. Like, you can do anything, but like at the same time, so he loses sight of his limitations, but he's not always doing it for something of like trying to prove it to me at the same time.
Read that quote again. I'm thinking about that.
Yeah. When you are page 126, when you are told and shown repeatedly that you can always do more, you begin to lose sight of your limitations.
Okay. So he's actually, is he saying you can do more, or what do you think he's saying with that?
Well, I think he used it in the context of, let's get the broader context. So he talked about some of his special ops training. He uses the term SMU, and I'm sorry I don't have that one right in front of me, but he says the culture is a two-way street. When you are asked to do something, you do it, and you do not ask people to do dangerous things that you have not given them the capability and resources to do safely and effectively. It is the whole grit thing being constantly and consistently reinforced. That was the culture that created the brand, which ultimately is what proliferated and got those of us in the organization to a point where we could do daring things that others would consider to be magical. When you are told and shown repeatedly that you can always do more, you begin to lose sight of your limitations. There was not going to be anyone else to call when it was time to get things done, so we had to use any means necessary to figure it out. That is when you start exploring the art of the possible with your team.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
And what I like about that, like you do with your son and I do with my kids, but even myself, we tell ourselves stories. And when I coach someone, you typically can't take them from point A to point Z in a single session. There's a lot of mini points along the process.
Yeah, I've tried that and it fails when you do that.
Well, it'd be nice. And you're mature, you're great at discernment, and you know how to consult really well. So you're like, this is the answer and this is how you're going to get there. If you tell them all the points day one, their head will pop up. Too much, too soon.
Right.
And there's this ebb and flow. And I think the life application for that is is the whole, there's work and rest. You work hard, then you rest and recover, then you work hard, and we're slowly growing as leaders. We're slowly growing as, both of us, fathers, as husbands. It takes a while to grow and figure things out. And it's really, for me, it's helpful to understand the process. I will look at my kid and say, oh my, where are we going? Hey, it's a process.
Yeah. What stuck out to you from a life application perspective?
A lot of it, for even me, in terms of life application, I want to sit on the process. And where I'm going with this with myself, looking at myself and where I'm growing personally, I have my own coach as an example. I'm comparing myself to where I was last year at this time. And even as I come up with next year's goals, I'm not as satisfied today as where I thought I would be. But looking back a full year, I'm like, it's been a heck of a year. It's been absolutely amazing. So along the same thing is understanding the perspective. It takes a long time for each person to grow. It takes a long time for our companies to grow, our relationships to grow. And even like on this podcast, as we keep refining it, it continually gets better. So no matter what we're doing, it's a process.
Yep. Well, and that actually ties to one of the other things on page 155 I was noting for life application. He talked about fighting that urge to manage and allowing the shins to get scraped. In other words, allowing that adaptation to occur while simultaneously preventing the necks from being broken. Like that is a lot like being a parent. If you hover over your kid and hold the bike so they never fall, they are never going to realize how to maintain their own equilibrium. At the same time, you do not throw a 7-year-old on a motorcycle because they could smash into a wall, and now you have failed. And I think that's, it's instructive for business, but it's also instructive for life, right? How do you appropriately challenge your kids and then put them in a place where, where they can succeed, right? Or fail.
Well, and fail in a safe way, not in a we don't want our kids or even our employees to fail in a way that they are destroyed.
Right.
And we've seen that. There are times when some people are so destroyed by a situation. And one of the things I wrote down was, there's a chapter about stuff that makes an impact. There's a quote about being destroyed. And I wrote, there's the Christian idea of evil that coincides with good, explains things in life better. So, as we run into, we just finished our company offsite, and I was reflecting upon Psalm, it's chapter 37 verse 5 about making your plans and giving them to God. But the entire psalm was 20 verses long about good and evil. So we are to make our plans, give them to God, but also in the purpose of this, it's not just one little verse. There is good and evil happening at the same time. Right. And things can take our businesses down. But there are also some really good things, and we need to at least be aware that we're living in this. And I think what Jeff would say in the book is, in cybersecurity, there are evil people that want to steal your data. They want to do harm to our country or our businesses. They just want to cheat and steal. And you need to at least be aware of that as we plan, and same with our lives as well. You're not going to let your kids say, you drive the car. I know I haven't. No, you're going to train them before you give them the keys to the car.
Right. Well, and at the same time, I think, one of the things that we have to be careful to do is challenge them enough.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
You get two extremes, not challenge enough or too much that you break them.
Yeah. Well, and an update, we had a little short and a video, I think several weeks back, about my daughter and her extreme ownership, right? And so we've actually since made the choice for her to switch schools, right? Because of the fact that on the other end of that extreme, we realized she was not being challenged to the point where she was actually stagnating. And she has been, basically not making any progress, not doing anything new, just all same stuff for lots of reasons I won't get into. But it was like watching her brain atrophy right in front of us. Right?
And as a good and loving father, you made the move. Now, you were not flippant with it. Some parents are too flippant. You're going to go to this school? No, we're going to go to this school. Too much. So you were very thoughtful in how you did that.
And so it's interesting to give you an idea of how smart my daughter is. She came home from school the other day, and I won't name any names in case people hear this before we left. But she said, and there's only 22 kids in the class, right? And they've been in school together, some of them since preschool, most of them. Anyhow, she said, such and such is already gone and at a new school, and I know such and such is considering leaving? Because we were asking how she's doing, because it was the first week that she actually, like, told people, including her best friend.
So she's reading through the lines. Well, 2 other people have already left.
It gets better. She goes, it's all the smart kids who are leaving.
You have no choice now, so if you leave her there, she's going to associate.
No, we had told her this week, and so she started telling people that she was leaving. So we'd made the decision. We informed her a few days ago. But she knew why we were moving her, right, in terms of wanting her to be challenged, and she understood even though she didn't like it. And we didn't like it either. We told them, honey, we don't like this, right? But we thought it's the best choice, whether, sometimes in life, you kind of have no good choices, but you have to make the best one with what you got, which is a good learning lesson by itself. But she was the one who got to the conclusion that it was the smarter end of the spectrum who were all leaving. And I think it helped her realize, mom and dad aren't completely off the deep end, which was good.
Well, and another one of my applications out of this book is what symbols and stories do we tell? So let's use that same illustration. Whether you meant to or not, you just put your daughter in the middle of a story that she's really smart and you believe in her and you're going to do what it takes to further your daughter's education. That's a great story. My parents so believe in me that they will move schools so I'm continuing to be challenged. What a great application.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's just one of those things that it doesn't come. It's one of those, it's interesting experiences, right, for life. And I think this to some degree applies to this book too, in terms of learnings here, but helping, working through that story and that symbolism, because these things aren't simple in the sense that, I think I was explaining to someone, this is the first time I think my daughter has faced not big emotions, because kids certainly have big emotions, but the first time she's had conflicting emotions about something.
Oh, that's good.
Like
that you've recognized
struggling with the fact that she's sad about leaving what she knows, or disappointed to leave what she knows, sad to leave a friend who she's become really good friends with. But I think also recognizing the fact that she's really, really bored and sort of intrigued by doing something more challenging at the same time, and not knowing how to reconcile that within herself. I mean, you're just teens. I mean, it's hard when I can't even do it. I'm 40, right? So it's hard for her, but it's good, right? And so just helping her with that, right, I think is important. And I think that's, it's how we lead too, right? Lead our businesses, right? Is helping people work through these complex changes, right? Change management, things like that.
If it was easy, everyone would do it.
If it was easy, they wouldn't hire us to help.
That's true. What's the last life application for the book?
That's the only 2 I got.
That's the only 2.
It's the best 2 I got. You've got to come up with them.
Well, I have a lot.
We'll go to the next one. Yeah.
Well, the last one I want to share, and this is a little different, but I'm thinking even in terms of life. One of the things we talked about it a couple weeks ago, if a predictable response can be evoked, it can be exploited.
Exploited, yeah.
And in my own personal life, I have to think, and this is hard. A lot of times we look at our own behavior, and we're like, this is pretty predictable. I'm going to do A, then B, then C. And, or even with my kids, where am I going to go with this? I can go a lot of different directions. If there's something we don't like about ourselves, we can change it, but we have to understand there's got to be some sort of resistance pushing up against this. So for example, as I work on staying in shape, I will purposely put in appointments or accountability to help me change the course. I very well know if I have a big, whether it be cake or don't have an accountability person to work out with, there's a good chance I will A, not work out, and B, eat cake or whatever it happens to be. So he would say in the book, if a predictable response can be evoked, it can be exploited. So how do we push up against that?
Yeah.
Either parenting, in our own personal life, in our churches, what does that look like?
Yeah, no, and that reminds me a lot about James Clear's Atomic Habits. We've quoted that before, right? And we've talked a lot about the importance of healthy habits, but I think what you're talking about in particular made me think of is what James Clear talks about in terms of how to change bad habits. Change habits you don't want is not necessarily to focus on the habit itself, but focus on the triggers or the precursors that cause the sort of outcome there, right? Whether it's the bad day at work, therefore I have the cake, or bad night of sleep, therefore I sleep in and don't work out. Like, what are the ways that you can get ahead of the triggers because you know the response. You can outthink yourself, outmaneuver yourself away from those bad habits.
And understand, not all triggers are bad. So when I'm coaching someone, I will frequently look for triggers, not in a way of beating them up,
Right.
but to use those triggers to encourage them in the positive direction. In coaching, we call this a mismatching experience. With little kids in cross country, what I will frequently do is I'll take some of the slower kids and I'll give them a 5-second head start on a hard interval. Well, why? Well, it's kind of fun to run away from someone else, and it encourages them to run a little faster. It also encourages the other kids to run a little faster as well, to catch them. And so that would be, for example, a predictable response that can be exploited. I am exploiting that as a coach.
Right.
And I do that in a number of different ways, but you can do that with yourself. You can do that with your kids, not in a way that punishes them, but in a way to bring out greatness that we all know is there.
Right. Yeah. That you see it and just got to figure out how to get it out of them. Right. Yeah.
So there are a lot of nuggets in this book. We just did a quick, even though we're 4 podcasts into this book.
3.
Well, 3 plus the interview.
Sure.
So I'm not sure if this podcast is going to come before the interview or after the interview.
Fair enough.
We'll figure that out. But either way, go buy the book. It's well worth it. And I just do want to thank Jeff for giving us a pre-release copy of it and some really good insights on, hey, how to run a great business. Also, I learned a lot about cybersecurity in the process.
Yep.
And also, hey, as you guys are listening to this on YouTube, do us a favor. Click on the subscribe button, or do leave us a 5, if we've earned it. If not, don't. But if we've earned it, leave us a 5-star review on the podcast place that you listen to this, whether it be Spotify, Apple, you name it.
All right.
But until then, go to theconsultantandthecoach.com, and we will see you next week.
Take care.